Good evening, everyone, and thanks for being here. This is the second edition of the International Fire Trial Day, Ebru Timtik Award, and I want to introduce you our host, Mr. Armando Blaya, the director of the Department of the Law Faculty, for his greeting. Please, Mr. Blaya.
Just two words to welcome you. Two words to welcome you to Palermo and to the Department of Law of the University of Palermo. And this is the ancient moment of the teaching, the Padri Teatini, in amulets. And so I hope you enjoy this conference and good work.
Now, this is my president, the president of the Palermo Bar, Antonio Gabriele Armetta, but everyone calls him Antonello, and he's a friend of us, and he really was a big supporter of this event, and thanks, President, the floor is yours.
Grazie Michele, parlerò in italiano per non deludervi con il mio inglese, penso sia la cosa migliore anche per esprimere ciò che penso di questa giornata. Innanzitutto grazie a tutti voi, grazie a tutti i colleghi italiani, a tutti i colleghi stranieri per aver affrontato questo viaggio e venire qui a Palermo per questi 2 giorni, dedicata appunto al giusto processo, alla giornata internazionale del giusto processo, ad Ebru Timtik, ma soprattutto ai valori che devono stare alla base di una manifestazione del genere. Nel nostro paese, in Italia, il problema del giusto processo è stato in qualche modo risolto con l'articolo 111 della nostra Costituzione, che ha cristallizzato, ha positivizzato alcuni principi che in Italia, almeno sulla carta, sono certi, sono stabili. Mi riferisco al principio della parità delle parti nel processo, al diritto ad un giudice terzo, imparziale, ma soprattutto soggetto soltanto alla legge. Mi riferisco alla ragionevole durata del processo. E l'articolo 111 altro non è in Italia che la sublimazione del diritto di difesa che è garantito ad ogni cittadino, perché il giusto processo è la sede nella quale il diritto di difesa deve trovare la sua attuazione, la sua concretizzazione. In realtà però tutti noi sappiamo che non è così in tutte le parti del mondo. Ciò che in Italia e nei paesi occidentali è oggi la regola, almeno sulla carta, ci fa capire come in realtà negli altri paesi tutto questo viene messo in discussione, tanto da far scemare, da far degradare sul fondo le questioni interne del nostro paese, i dubbi che abbiamo sull'effettiva, ad esempio, parità delle parti nel processo italiano. Se noi pensiamo alle vicende che negli ultimi anni abbiamo purtroppo tristemente commentato, mi riferisco alla situazione degli avvocati in Colombia, mi riferisco alla vicenda di Nasrin Sotoudeh, che tutti noi conosciamo, condannata ad essere frustrata soltanto perché ha osato manifestare per i diritti umani e difendere chi manifestava per i diritti umani. Se pensiamo ad Ebru Timtik, che si è lasciata morire dopo un lunghissimo sciopero della fame proprio perché credeva nella necessaria tutela dei diritti dell'uomo. Se pensiamo, e oggi ne parleremo, alla vicenda di Patrick Zaki, che in Egitto ha subito un ingiusto periodo di detenzione solo perché, oltre ad essere un attivista dei diritti umani, ha partecipato ad una campagna elettorale a sostegno di un candidato poi ritiratosi per le pressioni che aveva subito. Ci rendiamo conto che nel mondo ad essere in pericolo è innanzitutto la democraticità delle istituzioni. Un paese democratico deve garantire sostanzialmente prima di tutto 2 funzioni, quella di carattere sanitario, ma soprattutto la funzione giustizia, che è una funzione e non è un servizio. L'assenza di giustizia, l'assenza di un processo giusto in molte parti del mondo fa sì che non possa parlarsi di paesi democratici ma di regimi dittatoriali e soprattutto mette in pericolo la stessa esistenza, lo stesso ruolo, la stessa funzione dell'avvocato, che è ciò che noi oggi a livello locale, a livello nazionale, oggi qui rappresentiamo attraverso il Consiglio dell'Ordine, il Consiglio Nazionale Forense, l'FBE, che ringrazio sentitamente per aver partecipato all'organizzazione di questo evento. E devo innanzitutto ringraziare Michele Calantropo, insieme alla sua Commissione per le relazioni internazionali e i diritti umani, senza il quale non sarebbe stato possibile organizzare tutto questo. Allora, ciò a cui noi dobbiamo pensare conclusivamente è che finché nel mondo ci sarà un solo avvocato in pericolo, non sarà solo l'avvocatura in tutto il mondo ad essere in pericolo, ma sarà la tutela di tutti i diritti umani. Grazie.
Thanks, President. We share all the success of this event, and one of the best interpreter of the fair trial day is absolutely the FBE, the Fédération des Barreaux d'Europe, and we have one of the members of the presidency here, and I want to thank her for being here, and also I want to thank Ms. Sarah Chandler is a friend of us, and for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michele. It's a pleasure and a great honor for me to be here on behalf of FBE Presidency and FBE Human Rights Commission. FBE is a European Federation of Bars, and we represent more than 200 bars in Europe, European Union and Council of Europe, local bar and national bar. So we really represent a great number of lawyers in Europe. And the Human Rights Commission of FBE is very active, is one of the founders of this organizing Fair Trials Day in Europe, has been very active in preparation and cooperation for this event. And our commission is very active and very involved and very worried about all problems which lawyers in Europe and outside Europe can meet. And unfortunately, there are a lot of problems for our colleagues, not only outside, because as you know, even in Europe, in Poland, for example, access to justice is a great problem. And we are also very concerned about our colleague in Ukraine, who also begin to meet a lot of difficulties in their office as a lawyer. But our commission in the last time and still is very concerned with three main topics, as you already also said, about Turkey, Colombia and Afghanistan. As you know, Afghanistan will be as a topic, if I may say so, for the next day in 2023 for the injured lawyer. And we are really very concerned, and we try to help about the situation of lawyers who are really in risk of assassination, detention, and imprisonment only because they are lawyers and they defend their clients and they want a free access to justice. Unfortunately, it is not possible, and they're really, at least for their own life. And we try also to be very active and to be present with other organizations, not only in this country where the risk is very big for lawyers, but also, for example, in Turkey, we are also observers of different process, and there are still a great work to do in this country, and we have only one hope, it's that we soon have nothing else to do, but I'm afraid that we will still be active for a long time. And it is, of course, very nice, if I may say so, that all European lawyers, for what we are in FBE, that all European lawyers have the same aim and work together, because we are in our commission, we are really members in all different countries of Europe, and we have the same spirit and the same will to fight for the human rights, for the rule of law, and for the access to justice. Of course, we wish you and us a very nice conference, And we salute the bravery of the lawyers in different countries, especially this year, Egypt, for the one who are in prison and who are denied a fair trial. And of course, seeing this year again with great emotion about Ebru Timtik, who was very courageous and paid with her life, her will to defend a fair trial, and it is we still again think about her. Thank you.
Thanks, Monique. Thanks, President. And I want to introduce you, Mr. Tony Fisher, as a member of the England and Wales Law Society. We are very proud to have you here. And so we start the panel with the first panel. And Tony is the chief of the operation now. And Tony, the floor is yours. For the people that are linked with via Zoom, I remember that we have all the interpretations in the translation on the lower bar, and they can decide the language they want to choose. Thank you. Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, it's my great pleasure to moderate this first session, at which we will hear different perspectives on the fair trial challenges in Egypt. We have 3 speakers on the agenda today, and there is a further speaker who is in the audience of the morning. So I'll introduce each of them very briefly. Firstly, we have Mahianour El Masri, who is a well-known lawyer and activist in Cairo, many cases involving challenged fair trial rights. She's followed by Bahir Eldin Hassan, who's the director of the Human Rights Center in Cairo. Perhaps I could invite him to come up now, because he will be following Mahianour. And finally, we have Antonio Mazzo, who is an Italian journalist, who will give his own particular perspective. So perhaps I could invite Mahianour to start. The 4th speaker I mentioned is Rami Shaf, who I think you will know is a Palestinian human rights activist who has spent a considerable time in prison in Egypt without charge, and he will let us have details of his experiences. So Mahianour, perhaps you could say the floor.
Okay, hello and good afternoon, everyone. I think I will find it a little bit hard to talk about a very critical topic like that, especially when Mr. Bahiyuddin Hassan and Rami Shaf are going to talk after me, and both of them are real fighters for fair trials and human rights in Egypt. So I actually wanted to be in person with you, but part of the things that we have to face in Egypt, that my passport was confiscated illegally by the regime, and this is part of the thing. This is one of the lowest prices that lawyers and activists have to pay. We have fellow colleagues and fellow friends who are staying in dark cells, in isolated cells, who are in hunger strike, like Ala Abdel Fattah, who is on his 77th day of hunger strike. So I thought that I'm going to be the second speaker after Mr. Bahiyuddin Hassan. But I will...
and we cannot hear her.
Yeah, I know.
Can you hear me?
Tell this to her.
Can you hear me?
Hello, Mahianour. Yes, we can hear you, but
Okay, I will resume. Okay, so actually I'm going to talk on the main pillar that the Sisi regime is building, his narrative to the Western world about the human rights in Egypt. All the time, whenever Sisi is asked to release, for example, number of human rights activists or lawyers or anything, he says that there is no intervention in judiciary system. Okay, there's no intervention in the judiciary system, and that Egypt is a state of law. And actually, Egypt is a state of law, but which law? That's what we're going to talk about today. In October 2021, Sisi had stopped working with the emergency status, and many thought that this would be a new beginning for Egyptians to express the right, their freedom of speech, for example, their gathering right and everything. But the thing that things didn't go this way. It actually started with the idea of trying to embedding the emergency status in each and every law that started from 2013 after like the 3rd of July coup and after Rabaa massacre. Sisi started to embed to issue new laws. So he started by the anti-protest law in November 2013. That was law number 107. And this law actually made him able to control all protests, peaceful protests in Egypt. And like many people had been detained for years in prison. In another case, he was in prison for 5 years, for example, and 5 years in probation after that. That was the first law that he started with. The second was the military trials. Military trials in Egypt is a little bit old system that dates back to 1966, and it was like a tool in the hand of Mubarak as well. It is a very well-known tool, because now you don't have your natural justice. Like as a civilian, you will not be facing your natural judge. Sorry, you will not be facing your natural judge, but you will be facing a military judge who will be applying military codes and rules over you. And it actually, he reactivated it, and he made a decree in 2016 and in 2014 as well, that made the scope of the military court wider than that was before. Like, for example, anything that concerns, for example, gas stations, petroleum fields, trains, bridges, any kind of public properties, you can be actually facing a military trial. After that, in 2015, there were still some people who were trying to express themselves, a kind of freedom of speech. And at the time that Sisi was trying to deliver Tiran and Sanafir islands to, which are Egyptian islands, to Saudi Arabia, against the people's will, and against actually judicial verdict, Egyptian judicial verdict as well. He issued law number 1940 for the year 2015. This is the terrorism law, and the terrorism law actually is the main law now. Most of the activists, peaceful activists, are being judged with, and it gives a huge. It actually widened the scope of the word terrorism, and it made most of the lawyers, most of the activists, most of the journalists who are now imprisoned in Egypt, which the numbers are thousands, all of them are facing the law, which says that they are part of a terrorist group. The problem with this law that you are facing special courts, a court where even we as lawyers, when we enter the court, we are not allowed to have like our phones. We are not allowed to speak with the defendants. Because they are behind glass bars. So it's usually people, you are not sure if people had arrived to the court or not. So you are not sure if you are even representing someone who's even there. Sometimes you are prevented from talking to them, so you don't know if they were tortured, if they were like had forcibly disappeared for a while, or anything. And then after that, in 2018, he issued the cybercrime law. The cybercrime law is a little bit different because it widened the scope of the people who are facing trials, not only activists, not only activists or lawyers, but even singers. We have a famous cases for the TikTok girls who were only having a TikTok channel, and they are now being put in front of court because of that they are facing accusations of violation of the public decency and family principles, for example. So the Egyptian regime is widening the scope of the courts, because for years he had put his hand on the judiciary system totally. So there had been a kind of an alliance to the regime. This actually was concluded by the constitutional amendments, which gave huge power to El-Sisi. He became like the god of Egypt. He is the head of the supreme judiciary system, and that was like the last actually nail that was put in the coffin of the division of power regime. I actually want to talk more about military trials, as I want to give an example for people who are facing military trials, like Ismail Iskandarani, who's a researcher. He's a peaceful researcher, but his main problem was that he was covering a part of Egypt that the Egyptian regime doesn't want to put any shade or light on, which is Sinai, because at the time there was ISIS in Egypt, in Sinai, but on the other hand, the Egyptian army, and they are facing each other, but there are civilians who are being harmed from both sides. And Ismail, for example, was a researcher who has been working on that thing, and he'd been like now he got like a 10 years in jail verdict. On the other hand, they are trying even to control the whole community. So we have the NGO law and we have the trade unions law, and both of them give like a huge control to the regime over the Egyptian society. Those are the laws, and how it is actually very precise when Sisi is saying that that Egypt is a state of law. Those are the kinds of laws that he is talking about. Those are the laws that usually, most of them, violate even the Egyptian constitution, the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of having making your own trade unions or an NGO. So this is part of what he is talking about. Beside law, we have other things that we have to put some scope on, which is the forced disappearance. the first disappearance, we like 2 months ago, we woke up on a huge news that we had our Egyptian Giulio Regini, which is Ayman Hadhoud, who is also a researcher, an economic researcher, and he had forcibly disappeared for 2 months, and his family didn't know where he was, and they were actually threatened to talk about that he was arrested, to find that he was put in a hospital and then died. We actually don't know the reason of his death, but for 2 months he didn't appear in front of any prosecution house, and he was not convicted of anything. The second thing that usually happens in some of the in some of the cases in Egypt is the long pre-trial detention time, and of course Rami would maybe talk more about that, but in the Egyptian penal code it shouldn't exceed a year and a half mainly, or 2 years maximum if the supposed sentence would be a capital punishment or a life sentence. But here in Egypt, we have a number of people who have exceeded, in one case, the pre-trial detention. One of them is Amr Nuhan, who is a lawyer who had been arrested while doing his job 3 years from now. And we have like hundreds of people who actually exceeded in only one case their pre-trial detention. And when they come to think of a way to make the people stay more in jail, but not on the other hand break the pre-trial detention period, they made what we call in Arabic tadwir, which means rotation. A rotation is like, for example, you are arrested in a case and you spend this, then you get released on paper and be subject to another case with the same accusations. And so like the timer starts ticking from zero. So you, for example, you finish 2 years and then you start your another 2 years. And this actually is the case with huge number of lawyers, Haitham Mohammadin, Muhammad Ramadan, Ibrahim Mitwalli, Amr Imam. Imam is actually, he exceeded in one case the 2 years pre-trial detention. And finally, we have the emergency verdicts, and that Sisi, before he actually stopped the emergency law, the judiciary system referred number of people to trials. Those people who are facing emergency courts are not, actually they don't have any right of appeal, and that's the case in Muhammad al-Baqir case. He's a lawyer and he's with Ala Abdel Fattah and Muhammad Oxygen. Both, Muhammad al-Baqir took 4 years and Ala 5 years, and Oxygen 4 years. And we have Ziad al-Alimi, who's a lawyer as well. He took also 5 years in detention. And the thing is that they do something a little bit crazy when you try to use the law, is that they made a copy of each case. So, for example, you are arrested on case number whatsoever, 200, for example, and then they made a copy of this case with only one accusation, for example, and they refer to the court, but you're still in the pre-trial detention for the main case. And on the other hand, you are facing a trial on the other one. And we had a huge problem. Like, for example, in the case of Muhammad al-Baqir, we were not allowed to have a copy even of the case, of the interrogation, of all the clues. We didn't have a copy, and there was no hearing either from the defendant part or from the prosecution part, and they were actually sentenced. And it is a non-appealing, they will not be able to appeal the sentence, and the only way to appeal it is that Sisi himself would reduce the sentence. This is like a quick recap. Just I was trying to give you a brief on how the Egyptian system and the Egyptian laws, and how we as lawyers are facing different kinds of plays that the system is doing, trying to prevent any kind of fair trial for activists, lawyers, journalists, even Egyptian citizens, because they even widened as I told you, they even widened the scope of arresting of people. Like in 2020, they started arresting peasants and poor people who were protesting the new construction law. And they put them as they were a terrorist group as well. At the end, I just want to remember some of the lawyers who are behind the bars in Egypt, because only they were doing their job. Ibrahim Mitwalli, who's in a very hard medical condition. Muhammad Ramadan, who is now for 3.5 years in prison. Muhammad Al-Baqir, Huda Abdel Menaim, who is facing now an emergency law trial. Amr Nuhan, Haytham Mohammadin, Amr Imam, Usama Bayoumi, and many others who I will not be able to recall their names. Maybe I will finish now for others to join, and sorry for giving you a very long speech.
Thank you very much, Mahimoud, who has given us good insight into the many challenges faced on a day-to-day basis by the lawyers in Egypt. Of course, one of the most important aspects of the right to a fair trial is the right to be tried in front of an independent judge who is not subject to state oppression themselves. And I'd like to move on now to Bahi Eldin Hassan, the director, as I said, of the Human Rights Center in Cairo, who I think has much to say on that subject in relation to Egypt. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It is an honor to be here speaking alongside such distinguished panel of brave human rights defenders like Mahimoud, and journalists like Antonio, and international experts like Tony Fisher. Before I start, I wish to extend my thanks to the International Fair Trial Day and the World Committee for organizing this timely event on the right to fair trial in Egypt. Myself, I have been working on human rights in Egypt for over 35 years, and I can regrettably say that the right to fair trial, along with a long list of other rights, has never received much respect by successive Egyptian governments. However, it would be a mistake to assume that what we see in Egypt today is simply more of the same repression that Egyptians had endured before the Arab Spring. Over the past decade, the situation in Egypt, including that which concerns fair trial, has devolved into a human rights crisis, unparalleled in Egypt's modern history. Before the military coup of 2013, we experienced counterterrorism and emergency legislation, which were used to undermine many rights, including the right to fair trial. We experienced how civilians were tried by military courts as part of parallel legal system. And so, this parallel legal system fundamentally violated the right to fair trial. It somewhat postponed the complete co-optation of the semi-independent judicial system by the executive authority. The reality now is very different. The executive authorities in Egypt feel that they no longer need to even pretend to respect fair trial and the due process. The 2019 constitutional amendments were a landmark in the formalization of this direction. I mean the co-optation of the judicial system. These amendments gave President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi the unilateral authority to appoint judicial leadership and annul the judiciary's financial independence. I can discuss the legal and institutional implications of these amendments, but I prefer to highlight some tangible examples that reflect the sad state of the Egypt judiciary today. One example, when a group of former parliamentarians, members of the oppositions, lawyers and journalists, tried to form an electoral coalition called the Hope to run for 2020 parliamentary election. Those members, they were arrested. However, they were not questioned about their political activity and the intention to run for the parliament, but were ultimately added to a terror list and sentenced to jail for spreading what's so-called false news or false information. Another example in the same direction is the wife of a leading human rights defender who was sentenced to 2 years in prison for, again, publishing false news. Whereas the real reason for the sentence and the arrest, it was to pressure her husband. This is how the judiciary works, the reality. The examples I just mentioned show us how far the judiciary has been co-opted. Civil society and opposition members are being sentenced on grounds that completely unrelated to the real reason behind their arrest. In more blatant cases, we saw how lawyers are arrested while attending interrogations with their clients. But perhaps the most flagrant example of the mockery of fair trial in Egypt was the case of renowned blogger Ala Fattah, who got sentenced to 5 years in prison. This is really reflect what is the reality. After Ala presented, during the court session of Ala Fattah, he said that to the court, to the judge, he said that trials in Egypt don't follow due process and are more like a show. So after he presented a serious political defense, he hoped that every player in the show, the trial or the show, would be allowed to play their role. However, his defense lawyer were not allowed to access the case file. The prosecutor office did not bother to make its statement before the court. And the sentence, 5 years in prison, the sentence was delivered not by the judge, but by the bailiff. This is, if it is in the show, the theater, okay, but this is one scope. On a side note, today is Ala's 77th day in hunger strike. Personally, I had also several first-hand experiences. Through 2 separate cases in 2019 and 2020, I was sentenced to a total of 18 years in prison. This is the harshest sentence a human rights defender in Egypt has ever received. One of the sentences came from terrorism circuit. The first time I heard about those cases was through media and not through formal procedures informing me of the charges. The evidence against me included a public statement I made at an event organized at the United Nations. I would not be surprised if I faced more charges and the sentences for the statement I am making today. After all, the statement that got me sentenced to jail was one criticizing the failure of the judiciary to hold those responsible for extrajudicial killings, torture, and disappearances accountable. The case of the famous Italian academician, Giulio Regini, was the focus of my study. Earlier in 2016, under vaguely worded charges of pursuing acts harmful to national interest, or what's so-called national interest, and what's so-called destabilizing general peace, or what's so-called harming security and public order, another Egyptian court ordered freezing of my assets and those of my organization, the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies, along with more than dozens of human rights organizations and colleagues. The evidence against us was just our human rights work. However, I still consider myself lucky. Many brave colleagues inside Egypt are facing more dire consequences for their human rights work. The public prosecutor in Egypt also plays an instrumental role in the degradation of the Egyptian justice system. Since I left Egypt, two different pro-government talk shows hosts incited their audiences to murder me. One of those presenters, known for being personally close to President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, this talk show host called upon Egyptian security services to kidnap me from Europe and bring me and the others like me back to Egypt in our coffins, adding that this is something Egyptian security services have done before. The other talk show host called for attacking me with a Russian cleared agent. Although I had little expectation, the public prosecutor's decision to shelve my complaint against the murder incitement was shocking for its unapologetic disregard of the law. Again, I am not the only one who suffered from the complicity of the public prosecutor. Complaints by famous human rights defender Gamal Eid for being assaulted on the street, and Ala Fattah family who have been assaulted on the streets by police thugs, and the dozens of similar complaints are never investigated by the prosecutor. Meanwhile, the prosecutor acts swiftly when an unfounded complaint is instigated by the authorities against the human rights defenders, lawyers, journalists, and political dissidents. Ultimately, nothing better describes the current status of the Egyptian judicial system than a statement by United Nations experts explicitly saying that the Egyptian judiciary has made a mockery of justice. Unfortunately, when it specifically comes to state institutions like the judiciary in Egypt, what the authorities destroy in one day will take many decades to rebuild. Yet, many brave Egyptians are not deterred and are carrying on with the struggle to defend human rights, rule of law, and the independence of the judiciary in Egypt. Over a decade ago, I used to publicly say that an independent judiciary is the first line of defense of human rights. Today, the state of human rights in Egypt speaks to great length about the collapse of judicial independence in Egypt. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Bahid, for that very powerful intervention and those vivid examples of the extent to which you and others who are speaking out for fundamental rights and freedoms in Egypt are suffering. So we're all very grateful for your attendance today. I'd like to move on now to Antonio Mazzio, who as Thank you very much, Antonio. Another perspective and an important reminder of the role that states have to play in terms of challenging the sort of behavior that's going on in Egypt around the right to a fair trial and fundamental rights and freedoms. So now I'd like to finally call on Rami Shaf, who, as I said at the beginning, is a Palestinian human rights activist who has himself, as with others, experienced personally some of the things which we've talked about this afternoon. I hope he's still online, but could we give Rami Shaf the floor, please?
Okay, good morning, everybody. I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can't see you yet.
Perfectly. Perfect. First, thank you for having me here, and thank you for this congregation. It's very important to that today you dedicated the day for the situation in Egypt, the grave situation in Egypt, and it's very important to raise awareness about what's unfortunately has been happening in Egypt. I would want to start with a remark. The panelist introduced me as the Palestinian activist, which I am. I'm very proud to be a Palestinian, but also I am an Egyptian. And it is part of the unfair treatment that I got, that I was illegally pressured to renounce my Egyptian nationality as a precondition for letting me go out of their unending detention. But I do not accept that a military government and its oppression system decides whether I'm Egyptian or not. So I would always be called Palestinian and Egyptian, and being proud of both. I was just released a few months ago, and I stayed in arbitrary detention for 2.5 years. I guess my story probably is a symbolism of 60,000 other stories of 60,000 other Egyptian political prisoners that still rot in Egyptian jails. I was arrested in the early July 2019 by a huge amount of forces with machine guns attacking my home, my residence, that has been my residence for the last 40 years, terrorizing me and my wife, where they showed no proof of identity, no document to say that they have any legal premises in being in my home. They confiscated my computers, laptops, telephones, documents, books, clothing, bags and bags of things that they took from my home, that they never gave me a document saying that they stole it from my home, and then never released it to me in my way out of prison. Again, on that same fatal day, they arrested my wife and deported her illegally and unjustly. She's French. Deported her illegally and unjustly out of Egypt. They took me to a forced disappearance spot, which is the normal procedure for every Egyptian activist or Egyptian detainee, where I stayed for a few days in a state security facility. Again, a forced disappearance place means a place that is illegal, that is unofficial for them to hold you in. and that your lawyers, your family don't know what you're about, that you completely disappeared. And in most cases, they even deny that they have you. And then this places is where torture parties happen every single day from 9 to 5. In this place, you stay handcuffed, blindfolded, attached to a wall for days and days. Some people stayed for weeks, months, and years, and still rotting in forced disappearances under those grave conditions, illegally and unjustly. After a few days, they took me to a public or a security prosecutor's office. In that security prosecutor's office, I was faced with the only interrogation. Supposedly, I'm detained under interrogation, and I was interrogated only once all through my 2.5 years of detention. That interrogation went on for 45 minutes. And those 45 minutes, the interrogator asked me about my opinion of the revolution in 2011, and who did I vote for presidency during the elections. And when I got aggravated, asking how is that has to do with any legal procedures? Why am I being here? He said, okay, we are accusing you of being part of a terrorist organization. And I asked, okay, what is the terrorist organization? And he said, well, we cannot give you the name. And I laughed and I said, okay. And he said, then we're also accusing you of spreading rumors and lies against the state using social media networks. And I said, I never had a social media network. I never had even a Facebook account. So the guy said, okay, well, that's what's in front of me. You can say no. And I said no. And that went on, renewing my detention for 2.5 years, arbitrary, with absolutely no proof, no file, no case, absolutely nothing. I was taken to a jail facility after that. And in that jail facility, we stayed huge numbers of people crammed in rotting cells of 23 square meters, where we stayed 18 to 32 people. Sometimes we could not even sleep at the same time. We had to take turns because the place was not enough. We had to stay in a place that is infected with insects, with the rundown walls, sleeping on the floor in a small blanket, with a bathroom of 1 meter by 75 square centimeter, with a hole in it and a cold shower on top of it for everybody to use. And that was the conditions in jail. I can go on with the humiliation and the beatings and the torture people suffered, the humiliation families suffered visiting their loved ones, the complete lack of any medical care or medical attention, the usage, the arbitrary usage of solitary confinement for people to stay because of the lamest excuses, putting them in a cell of 1 meter by 1.5 meters, dark, with no windows, no doors, and with a bucket as a toilet and a bottle of water for your drinking, and staying there for a week and two, where I've seen a friend of mine dying there because he couldn't take the place. I can go on with the atrocities and the treatment I have seen people endured during their prison sentence or their illegal arbitrary detention sentence. I've seen people, when I first went to detention, I have seen there was annexes of the Islamic movement, who, by the way, even as an Islamic movement, all the people I have seen there were there for their political opinion and for political discourse. None of them were there for a violent crime. And I've seen another annexes of civil movement. But through the years, there are growing numbers of non-related ordinary Egyptians that became the predominant factor in Egyptian jails. I have seen hundreds of people who were arrested simply because an officer stopped them in the street, confiscated their telephone illegally again, and checked their Facebook account and find a joke or a comment, and sometimes even a like to a joke or a comment that was enough for them to be arrested and thrown to jail as terrorists. I have seen a doctor, I had a surgeon with me in my cell, a respectable surgeon, because his 9-year-old boy in school was in the lunch break was singing a song called Ya Hilwa Ya Balaha Abma', and that's a very old Egyptian song, a traditional one. And Balaha means a date, and Egyptians make fun of Sisi calling him a date. So it was used by opposition as a fun song against the presidency. When the boy sang it, the school teacher got state security. They came to arrest them. They found them 3 9-year-old boys in class. So they arrested their family. They arrested their father. And the father was still in jail till I left 2.5 years later, going to court under the file name of his 9-year-old boy because that boy sang a song in school. This is the kind of people that are predominantly in Egyptian jails today as political and as terrorists, as the cocktail accusations that they use against people in every time. Through my 2.5 years, I went 10 times to a security prosecutor's office and 20 times to a judge. Once in all of those where I actually met a judge. In all of the rest, I was crammed in a small room with hundreds of detainees, with a double glassed window where I could not hear the proceeding, were not able to talk to a judge, were not able to see my lawyer. My lawyer was not able to see the documents of this case. Completely arbitrary, has nothing to do with any legal procedure. And I've had members of the European Union attending my court hearings and realizing the atrocity, the complete shameful procedure, the complete show that was going on during those procedures. Finally, 2.5 years later, again, as Ms. Mahinour just said, the Egyptian law gives you a maximum detention period of 2 years, that if you were accused of a capital crime. I was not accused for capital crime, and I stayed for 2.5 years. Complete disregard of even the small procedures of the law that they have it in Egypt. Finally, 2.5 years later, I was pressured and blackmailed to announce my nationality as a precondition of my departure. And finally, when I departed, I again departed illegally. During my sentence, they put me in another case, like Mr. Mahinour just said, Ms. Mahinour just said, the rotation cases or the recycling cases where they put you in more than one cases as you are in jail. But on that second case, I only knew the news from the newspaper while I was in their jail. They didn't even take me to interrogation. They didn't even take me to a judge. They just made a new case, took it to a judge, got a court hearing, sentenced me to be added to a quote-unquote terrorist list without even having the right to talk to a judge, to talk to a prosecutor, to actually know what is the documents or why am I being accused for me or for my lawyer. And this is not appealed in any way. So I have, again, I left Egypt under the premises of being part of a terrorist organization or a terrorist list. And again, that doesn't allow me to travel. But when they decided to let me go, they let me go even against the law they put. All through my 2.5 years, officers in jail was trying to tell me, as well as to tell everybody else, that we don't care about the law, that there is no law that governs our relation, that you here are completely under our control. We own you. We can kill you and bury you and nobody know. We can deny you're here. We can rotate you or recycle you in other cases. We can sentence you. We can do whatever we want. We can tomorrow let you go because there's absolutely no law. Even the small procedures that the law says you have to go to a court as an appear every 45 days, we never went there for every 45 days. Sometimes you went after 90, sometimes after 70. They care to tell you that there is no law, even the small procedures of the law is not adhered by those officers and by these regulations. Ladies and gentlemen, I've hearing Mr. Mazzo speaking today about Giulio, which is something very disheartening for me. But I want to tell you that in the last days of my jail in last December, the officer were bragging in front of me, telling me that we allowed Patrick Zaki to leave. We will allow him to get free and be in Egypt, but we will not allow him to go back to Italy because we're using him to pressure the Italian government to end the Regini case. This is the kind of gangster's attitude that deals with legal procedures in Egypt, has nothing to do with fair trial. On the other hand, yes, and I understand the difficulties Italian courts been facing with the Giulio Regini case, and my advice, your only way is taking them to an international criminal court. Those officers who tortured and killed deceased Regini did not do it out of their own will. They are part of a system, part of a regime, part of an order. We should take this system and this regime to an international court where it can face justice. I finally want to thank you all for having me, and thank you for having this day to raise awareness about what's happening in Egypt. I call upon you as a congregation of lawyers and and people interested in the rule of law to find a map for Egyptians coming out of those atrocities, where they can take the criminals that dealt with them in this way to a court. We need to understand where can we have an international jurisdiction to try those criminal officers that dealt with people in that manner. Maybe if some of them pay a price for the atrocities they do to Egyptians, they will stop and they will come to think twice in the future if they are willing to do that or not. Finally, I have not, and 60,000 and tens of thousands other Egyptians, including Giulio Regini, have not faced a fair trial. But I insist that one day we will take this General Sisi to a fair trial where he can face justice. And thank you very much.
Further witnessing the nature of the crimes which are being perpetrated against those in Egypt. Well, that brings to an end this session. I think it's been a very wide-ranging set of perspectives on the overall situation in Egypt, which perhaps explains why this country has been chosen this year as the focus country for International Fair Trial Day. We've heard about the lack of judicial independence, the arbitrary arrests and detention. I'm just leaving the webinar in order to be able to speak to the use of counter-terrorism provisions, protest law, NGO law, media law, trade union law, cyberspace law, and the penal code to persecute individuals who are speaking out against the regime or simply representing those who are accused of offences, lawyers in the latter case. We've heard about the use of the military courts for prosecuting civilians. There are other issues which brought us to Egypt, the use of the death penalty, the failure to comply with the decisions of the African Commission on Human Rights. And we will be, during the course of the rest of this event, addressing some of those other issues as well. But for now, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much indeed to our speakers today. And I think we now have a break for coffee. Thank you.
So, 15.
Così lo vediamo. Così. Sì, no, lo usiamo, lo mettiamo poi con l'audio, poi lo possiamo mettere e si sente la traduzione. Può farlo perché c'era questo imballato. La possiamo mettere la traduzione che si sente. No, perché non è il telefono, insomma. Questo lo sto capendo. Sentiamo. Ci rimbalzava adesso, siccome lei non ha non sentiamo quello che dice è la traduzione, lo possiamo riattivare questi tempi, no, perché non mi spiego. Che sentono più capito. No, non si ne parla.
Io so cosa ho.
Parlerà in arabo.
I can take that. She's from which is the organization? Yeah. No, perché?
Parlerà in arabo.
Sì. E lo mettiamo in inglese proprio, diciamo.
Come diciamo sì, non posso sto soltanto non posso farlo.
E allora qua metterò in inglese adesso.
Lei parlerà in italiano?
Sì, ma ora il messaggio. Sì, sì. Sì. Ok. È già connesso. We start for the second panel, and I want to thank you, the president of the Italian National Bar, Ms. Maria Masi. Thank you, President, for greeting all the Congress and all the people attending. Thank you, Ms. Masi, the floor is yours. Grazie, Presidente, per essere qui. A lei la parola.
Grazie, buon pomeriggio a tutti, grazie a voi per l'invito. Avevo ed ho piacere a portare il saluto del Consiglio Nazionale Forense, anzi avrei voluto farlo stamani all'apertura dei lavori, ma abbiamo in concomitanza la seduta amministrativa ed è il motivo per cui riesco a collegarmi solo ora. Dicevo, ho particolare piacere a testimoniare anche la partecipazione, quindi non solo formale del Consiglio nazionale, a questa giornata, la seconda edizione della giornata internazionale dell'equo processo e sempre legato al premio Ebru Timtik, anche perché il Consiglio aveva consapevolmente e fortemente voluto promuovere l'istituzione di questa giornata aderendo al comitato promotore, nella consapevolezza che è necessario, anzi indispensabile, la riflessione, la condivisione, il monitoraggio su temi così importanti come appunto anche l'indipendenza degli avvocati, ma anche dei magistrati, quindi degli operatori del diritto in contesti diversi dal nostro, quelli da cui siamo abituati. Quest'anno la giornata so essere dedicata all'Egitto e quindi alla particolare situazione che questo paese purtroppo vive da molti anni. Non ho potuto e mi dispiace non aver ascoltato, perché so che era previsto anche un intervento in video di Patrick Zacchi, a procura poi anche con Barbara che vedo e che saluto, con Barbara Spinelli, di avere, da acquisire ulteriori aggiornamenti su quello che poi è il lavoro che state comunque portando avanti. Che dicevo, non è soltanto come l'occasione di oggi celebrativa, ma è l'occasione di condividere, diciamo, quelli che sono gli aggiornamenti sullo stato rispetto declinato in tutte quelle situazioni che riguardano gli stati di detenzione, il rigetto delle domande di scarcerazione, le condizioni rispetto a detenzioni arbitrarie oppure di condanna, insomma tutto ciò che minaccia, voglio dire, diritti fondamentali come appunto quello della libertà e anche quello della difesa. Quindi grazie per il vostro impegno, grazie per questa costante attenzione al tema e anche per aver voluto anche in questa occasione coinvolgere il Consiglio Nazionale Forense. Quindi grazie.
Grazie Presidente per il suo contributo, apprezzatissimo, e sappiamo i suoi impegni che la vedono coinvolta su più fronti anche oggi. Quindi la ringrazio veramente, il saluto dell'Avvocatura Italiana è importante e l'impegno dell'Avvocatura Italiana con lei è stato assolutamente più che apprezzato anche a livello internazionale. Grazie di cuore. Adesso passiamo, diciamo, a introdurre il secondo panel. Abbiamo qui l'avvocato Barbara Spinetti, che ci introdurrà all'ospite che a breve inizierà con la sua discussione, che è il dottor Patrick Zacchi.
Good afternoon. In 2018, I was co-organizing for EADH a fact-finding delegation in Egypt. But today we will not talk about that because we had our distinguished colleagues from Egypt that directly witnesses what is going on, so they perfectly describe to us the situation. I will speak in Italian and I will start dicendo auguri a Patrick Zacchi, buon compleanno. Sei nato un giorno prima e 9 anni dopo di me, per puro caso a coordinate geografiche diverse. Chi è Patrick Zacchi? Patrick Zacchi è un ragazzo come tanti, che ha scelto di portare avanti una parte della sua formazione all'estero ed è venuto a Bologna, nella mia città, per frequentare il Master Erasmus Mundus, che si occupa di Women's and Gender Studies. A rientro nel suo paese, in Egitto, per visitare i familiari, nel 2020 è successo l'inimmaginabile, l'arresto, la detenzione per 1 anno e 10 mesi ed un'odissea giudiziaria che si protrae fino a oggi. Ed è per questo che non parlerò del suo processo. L'accusa è la stessa di Ebru Timtik: minaccia alla sicurezza nazionale, propaganda per terrorismo, diffusione di false notizie per alcuni post che gli sono stati attribuiti su Facebook. Per Patrick si sono mobilitate le reti universitarie europee, il Parlamento europeo e molti parlamentari italiani. La mia generazione, quella di Patrick Zacchi, quella di Ebru Timtik, nata tra la fine degli anni 70 e gli anni 90 del secolo scorso, sono cresciute con una grande fede nei diritti umani. Per noi è venuto naturale considerare quei principi iscritti nelle convenzioni internazionali ratificate dai nostri Stati come qualcosa che ci spetta di diritto, che è necessario salvaguardare. Molti della nostra generazione non sono in grado di citare a memoria i versetti della Bibbia o del Corano. L'articolo 1 della Dichiarazione Universale dei Diritti Umani e ve la declameremo ad alta voce, con sincero ardore. Tutti gli esseri umani nascono liberi, uguali in dignità e diritti, sono dotati di ragione e coscienza e devono agire gli uni verso gli altri, in spirito di fratellanza. Noi ci crediamo davvero. Siamo nati nel bel mezzo di una storia che ci racconta di conquiste di nuovi diritti e di spazi di libertà. Come saggiamente faceva notare il nostro padre costituente italiano Piero Calamandrei, la libertà c'è, si vive in un regime di libertà, Ci sono altre cose da fare che interessarsi di politica. Il mondo è così bello, ci sono tante cose da godere, la politica non è piacevole. Però la libertà è come l'aria, ci si accorge di quanto vale quando comincia a mancare. E quelli delle nostre generazioni, nati in Egitto, in Turchia, in Tunisia, in Italia e in molti altri paesi del mondo, quell'affanno l'hanno provato. Noi italiani, quella sensazione di soffocamento, di sospensione dello Stato di diritto, l'abbiamo provata per la prima volta neomaggiorenni al G8 di Genova nel 2001. I nostri coetanei provenienti da altri paesi prima di noi, da bambini e poi da giovani adulti, con i colpi di Stato e le dittature che si sono susseguite nei loro paesi. Queste esperienze ci hanno lasciato la convinzione profonda che la libertà è anche agire contro la nostra società, se e quando con i suoi meccanismi e le sue regole calpesta i diritti. La nostra è una sete quotidiana di libertà, di giustizia e di democrazia, l'unico connubio che consente a chiunque di poter essere ciò che è, di esprimere la sua visione del mondo senza timore. La nostra fede nei diritti umani però fa paura e troppi di noi sono morti o sono stati privati della loro libertà personale per difenderla. Chi vi parla, per questo motivo, considerato una minaccia alla sicurezza nazionale dalle autorità turche, nel 2017 ha passato 13 ore in cella di sicurezza in aeroporto, subendo minacce di violenza sessuale nel corso del suo fermo e sta scontando un divieto permanente di reingresso in Turchia. Altri miei coetanei e coetanee di questa generazione sono morti per difendere giustizia e libertà in Turchia, in Egitto, in Colombia. Non serve che io faccia i loro nomi, tutti sappiamo di chi stiamo parlando. È il nostro piccolo cimitero, così personale per alcuni di noi che li hanno conosciuti, ma al contempo così collettivo. Shahid Namirin, dicono i curdi, i martiri non muoiono mai. Ed è proprio questo il punto, che la nostra fede per la difesa della giustizia, dei diritti umani, della dignità delle persone, è così parte del nostro DNA di cittadini del mondo che neppure il carcere e la tortura fino alla morte riescono a silenziare la nostra voce. Voce di persone, di giovani che urlano anche dalla tomba per avere giustizia e libertà. Su internet trovate un video di Ebru Timtik in toga, ammanettata, che urla nel corridoio del Palazzo di Giustizia di Chaglayan. Se un'avvocata muore, domanderà giustizia dalla sua tomba. Romperemo tutte le nostre catene, vogliamo la libertà per gli avvocati, la libertà di difendere i nostri assistiti, la libertà. Quando ho saputo di Patrick Zaki nel carcere di Tora della sua richiesta di libri per continuare a studiare, per non perdere l'anno, ho subito pensato che anche lui avrebbe potuto essere uno dei tanti universitari difesi da Ebru. Ho provato subito empatia per la sua causa. Mi è piaciuto fin da subito il fatto che avesse chiamato casa la mia città, Bologna, perché casa è quel luogo dove puoi liberamente essere, presentarti per come sei, senza venire giudicato. E a Bologna è così, chiunque tu sia, qualunque sia il tuo pensiero, c'è uno spazio di espressione per te, un sentimento di accoglienza per ogni forma di diversità che si respira per le strade ed ancora di più è viva nell'ambiente accademico. Per la città è un respiro osmotico, uno scambio bilaterale. La sua indole accogliente si accresce proprio grazie alla diversità di talenti che la scelgono come casa, anche temporaneamente, rendendolo un microcosmo così speciale, tanto da essere l'unica città ad avere una persona delegata dal sindaco per l'immaginazione civica. La professoressa Rita Monticelli, direttrice del master che è frequentato da Zaki e oggi consigliera comunale con delega ai diritti umani, ha fatto da vera e propria madrina per Zaki, coordinando numerose attività di solidarietà in suo favore e coinvolgendo fin da subito il comune e il nostro ordine degli avvocati, che ha accolto immediatamente l'invito ad essere presente. La nostra Presidente, i membri del Consiglio e la Commissione diritti umani hanno presenziato fin da subito alle grandi manifestazioni per chiedere la scarcerazione di Patrick e poi agli eventi pubblici e alla cerimonia di conferimento della cittadinanza onoraria. Bologna è stata la prima, ma oggi sono oltre 50 le città e i paesi che hanno conferito a Zaki la cittadinanza onoraria. La solidarietà si è manifestata da tutti i fronti e tutti tifiamo oggi perché la sua vicenda possa al più presto concludersi nei migliori dei modi. Mentre Patrick era chiuso nel carcere di Tore e pensava a tornare a Bologna, Bologna pensava a lui, a Nasrin e a Ebru, e i loro volti venivano esposti sulla nostra piazza principale e ci ricordavano di settimana in settimana quanto sia preziosa la libertà e quanto sia asfissiante, non solo quando la sua perdita riguarda noi, ma anche quando riguarda chi ci accompagna nel viaggio per la sua ricerca e la sua difesa. Gli avvocati che difendono i detenuti per reati di opinione spesso creano con loro un legame speciale, perché a legarli non è solo la difesa della libertà di esprimersi, ma anche la persecuzione per tale difesa. È strano trovarsi in carcere con i propri assistiti. È strano che un carcere nel 2022 possa ancora diventare la casa comune o la tomba dove gli attivisti per i diritti umani e i loro difensori, come una grande famiglia, si trovano a condividere la persecuzione da parte di chi ha paura della libertà. Eppure questo accade ancora oggi in troppi paesi. Troppi per stare in silenzio. Ecco il perché di questa giornata internazionale per il giusto processo, perché così tutti noi, persone, associazioni e autorità che abbiamo a cuore i diritti umani, come una grande famiglia possiamo continuare ad abbracciare e sostenere simbolicamente i nostri fratelli e le nostre sorelle che più caro hanno pagato il prezzo della loro fede nella giustizia. Con un mezzo così potente e universale come l'arte, che come la lotta per i diritti umani continua a mostrare il suo messaggio al mondo per l'eternità, sorpassando le barriere tra la vita e la morte. Cara Ebru, ti sentiamo con noi oggi e ti sapremo al nostro fianco sorridente il giorno in cui Patrick sfreccerà di nuovo in bicicletta tra le strade bolognesi. E ti sapremo al suo fianco a infondergli coraggio, anche se disgraziatamente le cose non dovessero andare per il meglio. Sarai per noi sempre fonte di ispirazione e non lasceremo mai cadere le tue battaglie. Vorrei terminare con le parole di Alaa Abdel Fattah, che come abbiamo sentito è anche lui in sciopero della fame, come Ebru, per la giustizia, per la libertà da oltre 70 giorni. Noi non siamo ancora morti e anche il significato della nostra azione non è stato ancora ucciso.
Grazie. Noi speriamo tutti che Patrick Zaki si potrà vedere sfrecciare con la sua bici in qualsiasi città italiana e qualsiasi città che voglia ospitarlo. È un tema centrale su cui tutti noi dobbiamo riflettere e grazie per il contributo preziosissimo da parte tua, grazie. Ora qualche secondo e ci colleghiamo con il signor Zaki. Stare col cellulare senza registrare, quindi dobbiamo aspettare. Cioè proprio anche la web per gli altri.
Sappiamo chi è,
Sì.
chi è collegato, quindi non so.
Non c'è questo caso. Vabbè.
Invito le persone a non prendere foto,
Sì,
da
dobbiamo
Zoom.
dargli un nuovo link. Secondo per qualche dettaglio tecnico.
Me lo dici quando glielo mandi via mail? Sì. Via mail.
Mi dispiace.
Sì.
Grazie.
Allora, quando è partito glielo scrivo quando sono collegata. We are waiting for Patrick to be connected in a few minutes.
Through Zoom,
Yes, he will be online by
Can
Zoom.
you tell the audience that we will connecting the speaker? We receive messages saying that what's going on.
We are waiting for connecting. In the meanwhile, I want to thank all the people that are connected abroad from Italy, especially the Unione Internazionale des Avocats, the International Bar Association, the CCBA, the FBA members, and Lawyers for Lawyers members, and all the other international organizations that are involved in the International File Trial Day. It's an organization that works all the day of the year for presenting this today the event, and it's very important, the contribution of everyone. And I want to thank them who is not here today, but I'm very happy to do this, and thank you again for the contribution, for all the efforts for the success of this event. So in a few minutes we start again, because we are sending the link for the connection to Mr. Zaki, and I ask everyone to avoiding any recording of this speech. Is absolutely not permitted, is not owned by either the organization, either from the Mr. Zaki. And so we can start in a few minutes. Thank you.
Lasciamo lo stesso perché sta guardando la mail, non c'è bisogno.
La teoria, come sempre, il problema tecnico è sempre